Welcome to another episode of Dr. G at the Heart of Healthcare. We're in season 2, just having a good old time here. I have my Instagram colleague over there in Toronto, no, 1 hour west of Toronto,
There you go.
uh, Kristen Lew-Byrne. She is here. She has the Instagram account Growing in Grief. Ooh, that name is something else. And we're just going to dig into grief and loss. Hi, Kristen.
Hi, Dr. G.
Welcome to the show. Let me just give you a good little introduction to my audience. First of all, we're celebrating your 1 year anniversary of Growing in Grief. So let's just go ahead and do a hand clap.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
All right. And so Kristen does one-to-one counseling for grief and loss. And we're going to dig into, those things that we grieve. It's not just when someone dies. So stay tuned. This is
Yep.
not a sad show.
No.
She does clinical consulting as a social worker for long-term care facilities and also hospices. She actually used to be the manager of Bereavement. She hosts does as education and host support groups such as the one she just recently did, honoring our grief as healthcare practitioners. We absorb so much. We need to have wellness and self-care for ourselves. And also, she's an artist. You did that logo yourself?
I did do the logo myself. I feel like, and I guess we'll chat about it more and it'll come out fluidly.
Yeah.
I created it. I did it because prior to I was a fashion designer before
Oh,
social worker, grief counselor.
that's fancy. So, like, how long did it take you? It's a butterfly. Is that a monarch or a different butterfly?
So that's a good question. I think we're just going to say, I don't think it was a monarch. So
Oh,
how I did it.
I don't know. Don't make me remember biology, okay?
Okay. I was social worker for a reason. I literally, what I do with my art is I will find like a natural picture. I live sort of like a tree line outside my house, and it was a nice image. And I just use, it's called Procreate, and I just outline and I color it in. And when I come home from work after a long day, as you know, Dr. G, I like to do some self-care and unwind, and I do that through my art. So
That's
out came
awesome.
my logo.
That's beautiful. That makes it much more meaningful. I like to put the logo as a part of, the podcast promo. And so I'm happy. I can't say that I drew this little logo. I was a part of, it has a story behind it. Everyone who listens to season 1,
Yeah.
episode 1 will know what happened with the mourning dove on my patio, but I'm no artist. So kudos to you. So let's jump in here. The story today is about you being a fashion designer, and I'm wondering, just hearing that interesting thing, if that's what helps you be so amazing at helping us navigate grief and loss and being a social worker. It's like you're a resource expert. You have to fix a lot of things and maneuver a lot of things around,
Mhm.
right? Like
Yeah.
to be a social worker.
Some days when I'm in the office late, and I think this was a couple years back, it was a really complex case. I often call myself, I'm like a detective, right? Because you're pulling from all these different places when you're trying to advocate for your residents, for your patients, or for your clients. And I think, looking back on my time in design, because I did that for over 7 years before I made that, leap or shift to social work, it taught me to really be creative and think
Mm,
outside of the box. And I think that is sort of, one of the perspectives that I integrate into my work as a grief counselor and a social worker and into growing in grief. I try and make it, looking at the gaps, what's outside the box. And that in and of itself was sort of how I even came to create growing in grief.
that's fantastic. And I like for, if there's any young listeners there, meaning people who are considering careers or even people switching careers. I went to med school when I was 37. So it's never too late to follow whatever other career. Everyone, you should just understand that each job you have, each path you take, you're getting tools there that you're going to use later. And so nothing is wasted. And so that is such a good thing there. So you did the fashion designer for 7 years.
Yeah.
What and then you were sharing a little bit of the story about how you then decided to do that career shift when a grandparent died, your maternal grandfather. Tell us about that.
Mhm. Yeah. So I was in school for fashion design, Ryerson University. It's the known school in Toronto, if you know anything about fashion. And I loved it, but I didn't think that it could sustain me and sort of like fill my cup as a long term career. At that time, on my maternal side, my grandfather, he had died. My grandmother, her health was declining, so we ended up moving her into our home when I was younger, living with my parents. And in trying to support, my grandmother, my mom, who was the primary caregiver, and she was sort of in this place of whether we should keep her at home or introduce the idea of retirement and assisted living. I saw the
Mhm.
I saw the gap. I saw how hard the transition or even the idea was for her, and I saw the stress and the toll that it was taking on my mom. And I think I was like, okay, I'm just gonna go online and click some stuff in. I clicked, older adult, and I came upon, this program called Social Service Worker Gerontology. It was a 16-month fast track program. And as I told you a little bit earlier, Dr. G, I started the program, had no idea what social work even entailed. Um, and on my first day of placement at a long term care, I walked in the door. I had a conversation with an older adult. And it was my aha moment in life that I was like, I knew for the rest of my life that this is what I was going to do. Yeah. And it was, even reflecting back on it now, and now my grandmother, she died about 5 years ago. It's I'm carrying on like her legacy and everything she taught me because she was my inspiration, right? So, yeah.
Oh, that is a beautiful story. Everyone has a story. Everyone has a reason why, and you are carrying on her legacy, and now you're sharing that with the world.
Mhm.
That's so awesome. And look, as I look up in my office, I have a new office here. I
Wow.
see this picture. It's the obituary of my godmother. I keep it, and she's like looking at me, smiling, and so I'm like, oh.
Oh, I love that.
Yes, I love that. Like, I didn't realize I put it there, but she's like staring at me. It's so awesome. Um, so okay, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing. So let's jump into the educational piece of this.
Mhm.
How would you define grief in a nutshell for our lay people? Because when people see the word grief or bereavement, they're like, oh, it's like something they don't even want to broach over, just like hospice, the H word. So grief, how can we just simplify what that means?
Yeah, you don't wanna know my favorite, and it's the simplest definition, and I'll say a definition with grief can always change. It's ever changing, but I say it's when love meets loss.
Oh, that's so good. Oh my goodness.
And
That I like
there's
that.
no more words, right? Like,
That's it. That's it.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Oh, I could say a lot right there, but I am not. You're the expert. We'll
yeah.
talk about it when I go. So when love meets loss, and then so what are some of the things that we grieve? Again, people think, oh my gosh, my someone died, my grandma died, or whoever died, my husband died. I don't want to talk about it. Like, what? Tell us like the types of things, the this diverse things that we can grieve, right?
Mhm. Yeah. So I'll say working, in long-term care and hospice, and all of that. Primarily, the people that I work alongside and the families, it is death related. It's death related, grief and a loss. But I always like to attach to what is grief and what is loss is that there's, you know, other kinds of grieving or other kinds of losses that we can experience, whether it is, the change of a job, the loss of a relationship. It's really, I put it back to the person, anything that you define personally as, a loss, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I like how, again, you said love meets loss. So someone may really love their job,
Yeah.
and get laid off, and it's just a change, or the kids, empty nester. Sometimes, the mothers are grieving that because their identity is all wrapped up in that, and so they love their person, so they're not having that routine around. That's a loss, and sometimes, change in relationship, divorce. I know there's one of the counselors in the community here. Actually, she coordinates moves, but she also does, like, divorce counseling and all that stuff. So all that is just letting go. Or if the thing has become so toxic, then maybe it's not a big loss. Maybe it's a relief. So yeah, there it's so many, ways that we can define that. We heard, over the years about the stages of grief. I have a lot of people on Instagram, they'll say, oh, it's not linear, maybe it's up,
Mhm.
down, all around in a circle.
Yeah.
I can't quote the name of the person. Kubler-Ross, she's the one who did the
Elizabeth
grief.
Kubler-Ross. Yeah.
Yeah. What are the stages of grief? Maybe we could review that, and maybe what some other newer models are for people.
Yeah. You know what? And it's really interesting because if you ever have like a room of social workers in it, you have two opposing sides. Some people will very much use and practice with the stages, whereas other people don't even like the mention of it. um, I say I'm in like a middle ground, and I'll give a bit of, I guess, a back history. So, like you said, it was, the stages of grief came about from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and a lovely human named, a grief expert named David Kessler. So, and this, gosh, I don't want to get the date wrong, but it was quite some time ago. So things have evolved, things are growing, shifting. But when you look at the stages, they said, acceptance, denial, anger, bargaining, and a lot of people, like what you see on Instagram now, is, and this is what I always like to mention, is if you were to draw out how your grief feels, it's not going to be a straight line. So for somebody who's never experienced grief or loss, there might be this misconception that it's going to be a straight line. But if I ask, somebody to draw out their grief when they are thinking or feeling into the loss of, their mom, for instance, it literally might be them scribbling across the entire page. And what I mean by this is like it's not linear. So grief is not linear. And that's why a lot of people don't like, stating the stages. But what I say to that is I like to pull from the stages, because sometimes when I have somebody who's calling me for initial consult, or they're sitting in front of me and they're really angry, that their 30-year-old husband died from, a terminal diagnosis. I can normalize how they're feeling, right? Sort of provide a little education, talk a little bit about, the stages, anger that they're feeling. And that's why I like to integrate it into my work. So, moving on, and this is a lovely, lovely book that I have read numerous times by David Kessler. He has, almost looked at his own work with Elizabeth and written this book called Finding Meaning. And sometimes I even do groups. I did a holiday group built around this once, where it's not about finding meaning in the loss of your person or whatever the loss is. It's about taking that and you know creating almost like a new identity, a new purpose. So, and maybe being on Instagram, how we met, I see a lot of stories of people who are widowed and they have turned into these amazing grief coaches who have these groups and they do one-to-ones and they have this lived experience. And that's sort of what he's getting at with finding meaning. It's absolutely not finding meaning in the loss, because there is no meaning in that. But it's looking again with that idea of like the outside the box, right? And creating a new identity for yourself. And what does that look like? Because I often always say too, is that when there is grief, loss, or a death, you're never going to be that person you were before the loss.
Hmm.
It's a hard thing to sit with. And even myself personally, with my own personal grief and loss, I sit with it. But on the other end, after, looking back, you're a whole new person.
Hmm.
And what is that going to look like? And
Hmm.
sometimes that's a theme and a goal that I'll work with alongside my one-to-one clients.
Hmm. That's so good. That's really good. While you were talking, I kind of Googled some of those different things like the scribble scrabble across the
Yeah.
page. And I think it's important, again, the tools we have, even in hospice, we have the FAST score, we have the this, the that. They're just tools to help us
Yeah.
assess, but no one tool is perfect, right? That's why people have toolkits. And so, it's great that we have them. I will put a link to those in the show notes, but it's also the key point here is knowing we have a new identity and something that grows from it, kind of like
Yeah.
your logo, the butterfly, like it was a
Mhm.
caterpillar, and we might see a caterpillar and be scared, but if we knew what it was becoming, we wouldn't touch it. We wouldn't step on it and smash it.
Yeah.
And so those are some great things. And so where love meets loss.
Mhm.
Uh, what other ways in which could you help people, or maybe give them some advice if someone's listening to this and they
Mhm.
might feel stuck or isolated or lonely? Sometimes people don't understand what they're going through unless they're death workers or something like
Yeah.
that. I deal with that a lot. But what kind of advice could you give to people to maybe work through things? Because I know you mentioned that you do some art
Mhm.
or fingerprints or
Yeah.
legacy projects. So tell us about that.
Oh my goodness. So many things come to my mind, and I'm happy to share more, and we can add them to the conversation or the podcast. But the first thing I always say to somebody, even like right off the bat, if it's our first conversation, is like wherever you're at in your grief, like that's okay. And it's okay to not be okay, because there's such a stigma, right, to in our society, and this goes, I think, beyond grief, and we can even, you know, talk about mental health or depression, right? When they're hard things to talk about, people don't want to say that they're feeling that, right? Because it means maybe we're not strong. But I said to like a client the other day, you know, like what I'm hearing you say is that you sort of feel bad about being like, I have to, I had to come to counseling because I don't feel strong. But for me, what I see is such strength to be like, you know what, this is how I'm feeling. This is the support that I'm going to like put in place. And, it's brought me to like a better place emotionally. Right. So for people, maybe in addition to this idea of like it's okay to absolutely be where you're at, you know, in your area, whether, I'm Canadian and I know there's a bit of differences over in the States. I have, some wonderful colleagues who work out of the States. It's sort of getting acquainted with what's in your area, whether it be like hospice. And maybe this is also true for, and you can tell me, Dr. G, but hospice has great, like in Canada, no cost counseling, no cost support groups. They will connect you and refer you to other places. Besides that, you have, specific grief counselors like myself, support groups. Some people prefer, one-to-one talking. Other people love being in a group because they see, nobody's going to experience the loss. If it's a spousal loss group, right? We're all coming together to talk about that, and everyone's experience is different, but you have fellow, widows that are going to understand pieces that maybe even your best friend doesn't understand, right? And that doesn't put any fault in the best friend, but it's finding support where it's going to be the best match for like your personal needs. So support groups, and even, you know, thinking about, I like this one. It's like, how do we continue to keep the person with us? How do we continue to honor them in our life? Because the other thing that I'll tell people is the one thing that death cannot take away from us is love, right? Like going back to that love idea, it's their physical body is no longer here. And walking it myself with my own loved ones, it is one of the hardest emotions, right? To feel all of that comes with it. But death doesn't take away our love. So how do we continue to, honor that, honor them, whether it be like their death anniversary, whether it be their birthday. There's so many great ones. I sort of have like a working list, because whenever I go and somebody gives me an idea, I add it to it. But you can start with, I mentioned thumbprints, right? And now this one would have to be done, with the person. But oftentimes when a person is really close to end of life, I just did one with a client. It's, you get like modeling clay, you can bake it, you can put their thumbprint in like a heart, and then it's a gift to their loved ones, right? So they can cherish and hold on to that. There's seeds. I went to a funeral recently where, you plant the seeds and you see it grow, and it's like you look out there and it's them still with you. You can plant like a little tree. Another great one that a retirement community had done was people that were moving from their homes into this retirement community. They brought pieces from their garden, right? You could do that. Did
That's good.
somebody that you loved and that you've lost, did they love, raspberry trees or bushes? Like I know, I wish I could go back to where, when I was a kid and my grandmother or my nana and me, we would pick raspberries and eat them before we got into the house. But I would do anything to go back to that house. And if that raspberry bush was still there, like taking a piece of it and having
Ah,
it here. Like
ah.
there's so many ways, and I could go on forever, Dr. G.
Okay, so now every time I think of raspberries, I'm going to think of this because I have some in my refrigerator that I need to freeze. So that's a beautiful story. I love that. And so I want to go back to the
Yeah,
flow of love. I saw a recent post on Instagram. I don't know this guy. He may be well known, but he was talking to a lady who was grieving her mother, and
yeah,
he shared, you know, how we experience grief is he didn't say wrong. He was very eloquent, right? I don't want to mess it up. But he
yeah,
said your person is trying to connect with you, but you're interpreting it in a negative way instead of being open to the flow of what it is. And so you're making different connections in your mind
yeah.
because the love is still there. That was the whole point. Like, I know I butchered it, but maybe I'll put a link to it. And so where grief meets love,
Mm-hmm.
where you are in your process is okay. It's
Yeah.
okay to not be okay. That is what it is. So
Mm-hmm.
you are the valuable resource today. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. Are you watching the Olympics at all for Toronto? Are you a Drake fan? Since we can talk about that.
Oh God, I don't know if I should say this.
Say it. Say it. We do all that fun stuff here because football
I'll tell
season's
you,
coming too.
Drake, I do hear his songs, and I have my arm starts, so there's, I start to dance a little bit. But when it comes to music, I have a really, I either like punk rock or country. It's a strange
Okay.
combo,
So we don't like Drake. Boom.
but I know he
Just
represents Toronto, so thank you.
well, whatever. Team Kendrick over here. I'm from LA. Okay. That's okay. Anyway, no, it's all fun. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your work. I will put a link to your website in the show notes. And just thank you for helping us see how we can grow in grief. That's a beautiful, beautiful service you do to the world, give to the world. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. G. And I also want to acknowledge you and the service you give to your community. It is of such value. So thank you for making a difference.
Thank you. Happy to be here. All right. Peace, everyone.
Bye.